Hello, David McMillan disgracing your screen with more of the never-ending series of interviews with Shaun Attwood. Usually I'd throw up the full editions. They'd run for around 2 hours. But I was not so impressed with part 11, so I won't use all of it. Even so, there are some good bits worth keeping from 11, and I'll load them now. All the people that gave up their hard drugs, their drinking, their wanton disregard for any sort of codes of behaviour, they all declined very rapidly after that stop. Look at David Crosby. He went out. And I'd always remember that if you're going to arrive back in the West, don't come empty-handed. It doesn't have to be a lot, but, you've got to pay your way. I suppose my only way out of that problem was to make myself being more valuable alive than dead, or set up and used. They'd been there in the early days. They'd fought the battles in the streets with the police. They'd hidden the stuff. They'd even built the tunnel that crosses the river underneath from the place. One of the other sons was a guy killed in Paris. They say he was poisoned. It's like the Kennedys in a crazy way, sort of Asian version of the Kennedys. Yeah. The other thing in my snooping I saw down at the enemy of my friend place was I opened a big freezer expecting this was where they kept the alcohol. But I looked in and there were plucked pigeons or something wrapped up in cling film. Indeed, they were the hands of Nordjohn's missing friends. They'd fought guards, they'd killed a couple of those. I mean, it's strange again. You'd think their lives would have been over before that. But amongst prisoners, they'd killed, I don't know, nobody had an accurate figure on that, but I know it was at least 16. And I was thinking of this because I was saying to myself, from small things, big trouble can come. Hello, Shaun.
It's the return of David McMillan, and he has filmed 11, or perhaps even this might be the 12th true crime podcast in the studio. What could possibly keep the audience engaged for a dozen eps?
They probably fell asleep and woke up just in time to switch it off. Hello, people.
David McMillan has been incarcerated in 5 continents, multiple prisons, escaped from death row multiple times, including from Thailand. And I would urge people to go back to episode 5 or 6, I think it is, and listen to David describe this breathtaking account of how the stars aligned and he managed to get out of death row in Thailand.
No, I'll stop it there. Life's too short to have to choke down either Shaun's gushing introduction or my cheesy recap of my miserable life. So let's find a part where I say something of value. Wreckage of a misspent life. But, people who give up their vices, as I found often, all the people that gave up their hard drugs, their drinking, their wanton disregard for any sort of codes of behaviour, they all declined very rapidly after that stop. Look at David Crosby. He went out. I'm sure viewers could think of lots of people who went on the wagon and then straight into the grave. But I'll put you off. True. So I kept on making these mistakes, and where we find ourselves at this point in 11 or 12, I've managed to get out of the worst of Pakistan prisons and kind of cleaned up everything I can there. There was the cousin of my longtime friend and protector, a tribal lord from Balochistan, Mir Nurjan Magsi, who I met really when I was 23, wandering around in that part of the world. And he, have you ever met somebody who, and you can tell straight away they're respected by everybody around? You would have found that in Arizona all the time. Yeah. And you're getting along well enough with them. They seem to like you. You've got something to talk about. And I know where you were being more literate and being able to handle paperwork, you were valuable on that score. But did you ever find you had that great doubt where you think this powerful person didn't become lord of his domain without being ruthless? Am I just a tool that can be discarded when I have no longer use?
Yeah. That's how they establish themselves, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose my only way out of that problem was to make myself being more valuable alive than dead, or set up and used. For example, in the Thai prison, a lot of the sap couriers, mules, I never regarded my personal couriers that way, but they were certainly regarded that way. They would be just used up on 4 or 5 runs and then shopped to the police. So in everything I did, I tried to always, and it was not an entire lie, it was just not really well formed, that the future was better with me in it and functioning than not. And that more or less kept me alive for a long time. But my dear Norjon Magsi, the tribal lord, he was facing a lot of charges. The great September 30 massacre of 120-odd people in Quetta was a trial that never ended. It had been going on 10 years. So I wouldn't say his hands were entirely clean. But it wasn't any of that brought about his death. He died in a street at evening when an attempt had been made on his life, which he'd survived in a way that, to me, I was only there because another cousin had opened a Subway branch franchise. And Norjon kind of picked up on it before any of us. There was something not right. He could really read a street. Now, the great crime writer and now passed on, John le Carré, said that a foreigner can never really read the street of another country, not his own culture. I don't think that's entirely true. Surely if we lived there long enough, picked up on mannerisms. Though where you were was a place I never played in the United States, because I found even the crooks there seemed to be a bit of an actor as part of them. Maybe not when you cross the border into Mexico. The act is the reality, but certainly in the United States proper, I couldn't tell whether they were potential informers or they were playing it straight. Did you ever find that harder to read than English people?
So, in my case, we established relationships with the locals early on in the rave ecstasy scene, which insulated me from outside threats, because they can read the street, and everything that was happening on the streets then got reported back to me.
Okay, so it's like you had about 5,000 field agents or something like
200.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you remember names of 200 people? Hi, guy.
Well, most of the ones who were closest to me, Acid Joey, Joey Crack, Wildman, they're all deceased now. They're all such high risk, the lifestyles that they pursued were very high risk.
And a little careless about health.
Big drug consumption was massive.
Wildman was a drinker too, wasn't he?
Yeah, he did drink a lot, yeah.
But that's true. It's always good to be a survivor, because at least we're here to tell the story.
Indeed.
And that's what we're doing.
Yes.
One of the things, so all of Pakistan was kind of behind me. Your past never is it? There are moments I'm sure you wake up like you're in Arizona still. But I managed to get back into the country on unsatisfactory documents. I mean, I prefer the passports that I'd get myself, apply for one way or another. Of course, it's changed now. You can't just use some what did the police used to call it to my face? Dead babies' birth certificates. Let's not say babies. It was 9. I mean, he had a bit of a life before succumbing to a swimming accident. No, that won't work because the deaths are now correlated. But there I was. I arrived in Oslo, and it was just about to turn into the year 2000. I was hoping my tan had kind of faded because I was in transit at Athens and had a Macintosh I'd borrowed from somebody, bought at a kind of big warehouse over there, and managed to get back into Sweden, where I had old friends that I had to find out what happened to. Because, as you know, in smuggling, or there's usually some stock somewhere around that is unaccounted for, or some money to be paid that hasn't been collected. So you live in hope. Ladies and gentlemen, don't live in hope on this one, because money finds a home. It does. Like some miscreant little street tramp, it latches onto people and goes in their pockets. If you think you'll ever find lost money, no. I even had somebody go into one of my storage lockers in, where was it? Down in Fulham. What kind of idiot. It was paid up for a bit. What was the urgency? I thought the number of the box had been left. People, if you find yourself in a prison, doing nothing is what it's all about. Don't do anything. You can't save anything or get somebody to go and do something, or even worse, think you can get a little enterprise going from long distance. I've tried that once too. And it wasn't even a thing. It came up later from Denmark, but I'll go into that later on. But in essence, what it was trying to find work for my traveling people. And a couple of them, including, my wife called him the lollipop man. The guy who does the traffic of it.
Yeah.
Because he looks so ordinary and innocent. Because he was a bit chubby, he had the nickname. His code working name was Harry Lime, which is from the old film with Orson Welles. And what sort of code names did you give people? Did you base them on actors or?
So it's all just like nicknames from the scene that we were in, really.
So was there actual nickname?
Nobody ever had real names that they used. Everyone just had a nickname.
It's funny, you would never actually get to know their real name.
Yeah, which is good because the cops couldn't figure out who we were.
And you wouldn't carelessly say it when you're being monitored by something like that. I knew a couple of safecrackers many years ago. Nobody really knew their own names. I think perhaps their lawyers. That's about it. Maybe their mother. I don't know. And I mean, think of it, in London, how many my weekend texts from dealers are always from somebody called AJ or Junior. How many dealers are called, "Hey, Junior, eh? Remember when you street cornered me for those 2 grams, you bastard?" Anyway, about 100,000 juniors have become, ooh. Oslo was a choice on purpose, as all travel arrangements should be, because it's not in the European Union, and yet you're treated like you are. So no heavy checks on anything. If you show an EU passport, checked? No. Looked at, perhaps. So that was a good way in. And once in there, then you can take all sorts of transport from there across lands. Now, I suppose the first place I went to from there was, I came back to London to see, my house had been long passed on to somebody else. The landlord, he wasn't entirely very helpful. You might recall I had a girlfriend in London at the time, Eloise Morse, and I hadn't been entirely frank with her. She didn't know anything about what I did, but she suspected something not good. Once in one of the flats I had, she looked at a passport that I'd carelessly left, cover closed, and she went to take it, and she said, "No, I won't. I'm worried about what I might see." And true enough, she wouldn't have seen any of the names she knew me by. But she said to me once, "Oh, you could be a money trafficker or a drugs launderer." I think she had that backwards, but I got the general point. But we settled on troublemaker as an occupation. She'd actually been to my old house too. The reason I even had an interest there, I still had and I tell you what, I've mentioned this before, that there was £2,000 behind the PowerPoint box stuffed in there.
Oh yeah, what happened to that?
On the stairs. Well, yeah, I couldn't get in there to find out. And it's not the kind of thing there's any point bringing up. Can you imagine you call somebody and say, "Look, you know that house you were renting? There was a couple of grand in there, behind it."
Couldn't you have done the electrician thing?
Yeah, I was sent by the... Well, luckily I didn't, because the people who were living in there were half his family. But he wanted to kind of... So I looked through the window and my old furnishings were still there. Rang the landlord. "Oh, the police took everything," he said. "Oh, really?" "Yeah, furniture, clothes, the lot, I'm just having seen it." "Okay. Oh, yeah, but a very nice overcoat. Listen, I'm down in Oxfordshire. Why don't you come down there?" He didn't have foul intent. He was just one of these self-styled upper crust businessmen that was all curious about it. I mean, bad enough when Eloise finally tracked him down, he'd said to her, "David, 2 tons of cocaine in Karachi." Well, I did say to Eloise that it would take me a little bit longer to get back if it was that, or quicker. I would. It's a peculiar thing, that part of the world. It's very expensive, cocaine, because there's no natural source of it there. So I'm told. Anyway, but it was no easy repair job on Eloise. She didn't want to really know anything about what had happened. So what I did was, I thought, give her a chance to walk out. So I kind of painted a picture of myself as burnt out and not connected to anything. I rented a place in Sloane Avenue. It was just a studio apartment. But I took her to my brother's place because I was staying there for a couple of days, but not at the time. I thought, yeah, I can be the oddball of the family in my brother's little family, the reprobate uncle or something like that. So that might put her off. Now, I mean, you're probably thinking, what are you trying to do there, David? You want to get her back or you want to dump her? I wanted an easy way out, I suppose. So, and I got along well enough with my brother, though he's pretty cynical. After all that time, even in when I got back from Thailand, I turned up at the Finsbury Park house, having called him. He didn't say anything. And I got there late because of Heathrow and some other stuff. And his wife had gone to bed. The kids were asleep. And he sort of looked up and went to say something like, "What the fuck?" But decided that would only open up, the kind of 10 episodes of recordings we've done. So instead he said, "There's fresh towels in the guest room, and I still eat Cheerios, so there's plenty in the cupboard. We'll catch up tomorrow," which we never really did. By the time I woke up, I was already heading off into town, and he looked up from his home office desk. Just said, let Anna Maria, his wife, let her know if you're not coming back for dinner. There's an envelope on the kitchen table for you, which I took with me. So I didn't even have my addresses or anything. I mean, there's nothing left. You can imagine, I don't know where anybody is. I don't know what's left. I'd already burnt everything by disobeying a rule. When was it? Recently we were talking about it. When you're in prison, don't try and get anything done. Just read a few books or something. You can't fix stuff. Do not open the treasure stores, Aladdin's cave, to anybody. Sure, they'll take care of it, all right. The guy I sent to the locker, I don't know what he did. You know what annoyed me? I didn't mind him stealing all the foreign currency. That I expected, really. But all the documentation, the titles to things, the bank accounts. There's still one in a slightly lesser-known Spanish bank, which has an office in Knightsbridge that has a load in it. Can't remember the signature. But even so you can't do anything in prison. But what I had done was found a place to keep an address. And this is always quite good. You can still do this. If, say, you're, it doesn't have to be in crime. No, you could be a Greenpeace activist. Yes, you could be fighting the regime in Burma or on the losing side of the Taiwan crisis. We should discuss that one time. But there used to be phone shops all around London at the time. Now, not so much because it's cheaper to call on deals or a friend's phone. And they had little computer services there. But they also had some letterboxes you could rent in the corner. And these were very ill-used in this one in South Kensington. I think there was 8 of them, and nobody ever took them. But the key was a kind of universal generic key. So I went in there, nodded at the guy at the desk. They didn't give a shit, you know. Went over there and opened it up. But here's the thing, you don't put your envelope with information in sitting in there. You make a panel that goes on the top and glue it in there. So even if somebody else rents the box in the meantime, as long as the damn thing physically exists anymore, you're in. Yeah. I've been looking at Amazon boxes, you know. Interesting thing. Anyway, that aside, but a lot of names I got out of, you go to, I mean, this might be a sideline, but the point is people are actually interested in how do you keep a long list, a diary, as it were, without anybody ever knowing. Do you keep it in your computer files? No. Do you keep it in anything connected to you? No. You go to I guess it'd have to be a public library now, to get online. And then you start an email account, doesn't matter where, make a draft letter. Inside, an attachment in that draft letter is just a Word document, and it's a long list of everything. You never send that draft. It just sits tucked away in your drafts, and it'll stay there. Well, I shouldn't say inactive accounts. They last quite a while. I mean, Google are trying to limit the amount of free storage they're giving with inactive accounts, but they never get rid of them. They almost can't. They don't know what to call an inactive one. There's no draining activity or a lot of storage there. They just let it go. They never know when Adolf Eichmann might come out of retirement and come forward to get it. So I had a lot of stuff from there, and I left Eloise kind of dangling. She had another boyfriend, of course, but I checked out her flat. He wasn't living there or anything. I mean, one of those girls, like a monkey in a way, never lets go of one branch with a firm grip on the next one. But I didn't count him for much, whatever he was. And I was a little undecided as well myself, because it'd been so destructive. In my early career, I'd lost a a wife through. Well, I always blame myself in a prison fire, and then I've had to say goodbye to a couple of people who weren't. I mean, what use was I? Even my brother used to be very sarcastic about that. Well, you found, he'd say, somebody rang for you, tracked me down. Is that somebody you're exploiting or just misusing? But I'm not sure. But he's less cynical these days. We do as we start knocking on the old Grim Reaper's doorhouse. I'm sure you'll find that'll pass some. And went to, there was nothing else for it but to go back into Scandinavia to see what was going on. Not so good in Sweden. My intermediary to a guy who I still had about 100 grand coming had he'd been neglected. I mean, a very nice guy. He was back in the days when it meant something. He was a photo editor at a magazine, but he was something. Thomas, his name was. It was always safer to keep somebody in between me and the big man over there, because Wolf, there must be a million of them in Sweden with that nickname. He was sort of wanted, so he had to be a bit cautious. And I'd arrived at Thomas's place years earlier, and I knew he was the right one. And this was after Thailand, and I had nothing, but I had cargo. And I'd always remember that if you were going to arrive back in the West, don't come empty-handed. It doesn't have to be a lot, but you've got to pay your way. And I think I had about 20 pounds left to my name. I couldn't have even paid my hotel bill. I didn't have a hotel. Yeah, that's right. And it was nighttime. So I'd met him, and he has to be right. I've only heard about him through somebody who'd passed on, that he knew people. I mean, how thin is that? It's like going to New York City with a telephone number and say, ring Joe, he knows people. How's that going to work? Anyway, back then, years earlier, I'd knocked on the door, and he was kind of right. I mean, I had rung the number beforehand, but he didn't go into a lot of stuff. You like that in somebody, They want to be told in person. Let's not go into it. You come here. He lived by himself. He was a bachelor. He had a cat. Yeah. But the place looked right. It was kind of, he kept things, I don't mean just family pictures, little knickknacks. It was sort of neat. The living was, I mostly lived in the bedroom. Complete junkie, of course. But he was kind of neglected. Just going back those few years to that night, everything worked out fine. Because I had cargo, we didn't even bring it up for 15 minutes, just chatted about world events, mutual friends, like there was one, and he was dead. And he kind of looked at me and said, oh yes, I do. And here and now. So we got newspapers out, tools at the ready, taking this thing apart, but that was fine. But I found with him that he did need looking after. And I mean, if you probably come across people that if you leave them alone for a while and you come back, they're in a worse condition. That somehow, I mean, if they're really bad, they haven't paid their rent, but it's just, there wouldn't be proper food in the cupboards, and he looked skinnier, and the cat was fed all right, which was good, the litter box. But I would, in future, go around there I'd stop at the supermarket first, and get full groceries and come around and sort his house out for him. So I was hoping that there'd be another happy little reunion with Thomas. No. You know what annoyed me? Of course, he was dead. Neglect. Died in that apartment. What from everything. And I'd sent somebody over there to look after him. Well, not really, to pick up some money and make sure some stock was taken out of a safety deposit box there. By the way, in Sweden, you'd think that it'd be difficult because it's a full-on ID card state, and everything from cradle to grave, you're logged and registered, and they don't mind it. They pay huge income tax. I don't know what, 70% or something, but everything is taken care of. So if you're not on the system, you don't exist. But what do they do with visitors and foreigners? They make up the personnummer, the personal number, and they just call it a string of zeros or something. And so I'd opened this safety deposit box in a chatty way with my passport, and to dodge what I knew would be potential problem. If you find yourself in such a situation where they're being helpful and just giving to fill in the blanks, without which the screen won't go to the next stage of opening something or doing something, don't let them put a string of zeros in. Say, let's use my phony date of birth, and that way, it's I'll remember it if I. Oh, okay. Now that kind of tricks the system into thinking, yeah, it's a real person as opposed to a foreign devil. So the time comes later on. It's a bit like here now in Britain. There's talk of ID cards, isn't there? Again, Boris, who said he'd personally eat one if he was ever asked to produce one. I guess he intends on using either rice paper or some flavored ingredient in the ones that he's now favoring. But no, there was no kind of reunion back for that. But so I opened Simon's envelope, the one he left me, and it had a Visa card in there. And he'd written the PIN number and in quotation marks, which means it was the card speaking to me, not him. It was just the phrase, "Be gentle with me." Well, I mean, there's limits to these things, Shaun. You've got to live. No, make that the suite. Yeah. And get room service. Yeah. Well, it wasn't quite that bad, but anyway, I had a couple of calls from another friend who was in Denmark, so I flew over to Copenhagen. There, and I've mentioned it in passing just before, they have a place called Christiania. Have you heard of it?
Mm-mm.
Well, it's it's kind of a suburb, but it's a very inner city place. And it used to be, I believe, an army barracks, so it's kind of laid out a bit uniform. But it was taken over in the late 60s, 70s by very dedicated hippies. It became a full, supposedly, self-sustaining commune. They had a little industry there. I think, do they still make these bicycles? Those irritating bicycles. People have a huge, box stuck on the front of it, and they deliver things, groaning up hills as they strain themselves. No wonder they all have heart attacks or get run over by trucks. Anyway, that's their legit business. But amongst all the other stuff there's a couple of other general store and a pub. And I'd been told to come at a kind of a particular time by Florence. Now, Florence was at the other end of this number that I still had. And we met at, it's quite a good place to meet if you ever have to have a meeting in Copenhagen. Teatret, the theatre. It's right in the centre. 7 ways in, lots of ways out. We used the telephone code, which seemed to be, it wasn't popular enough to be well known, but it's simply that if you arrange a time and a day, you put those times and days 1 day ahead and 3 hours ahead in your conversation. So if it's going to be Monday, you say, I'll see you at Tuesday at 6 p.m. That means Monday at 3 p.m. Why are you putting ahead? If you do it the other way around, say you've said at 3 p.m., but in fact at 6, they might get there at 3 and hang around till 6, so dedicated they be, whoever they are. But now the reason for all this caution was that my friend Emil, the Danish guy, was in prison with a bunch of other people, including Lithuanians, a couple of Russians, over a big hash run from Pakistan again. Well, I wasn't heading back that way, no matter what. Anyway, I didn't even know at that stage what's the point of all this, But I met Florence, and then I went to Christiania the next day. If you go in through the main gate, look, they a very right-wing, what was his name, Rasmussen, Prime Minister of Denmark, more or less closed it down, but it's kind of sprung open. It was a bit of a tourist draw. It's got a big set of trailers and stalls and caravans in the center street there, which sell ready-made reefers, little blocks of hash, quite a good commercial way. They're blocked up, the weights are good, the prices are not exorbitant. I used to buy a couple of ready-made joints because I'm too lazy to roll them. Never a big smoker anyway, Shaun, just sometimes before closing in for the evening. Kind of when I was a bachelor and when I was younger. I don't know. That old Huey Lewis song years ago, I Want a New Drug?
How's it go?
I want a new drug.
Has David ever sang for us before?
Now, the only thing I sang for my YouTubers, not sang, I did some 60s American comedies, theme show songs as poetry.
Wow.
Such as Beverly Hillbillies.
This is a story of a man named Jed.
A poor mountaineer brother kept his family fed. When one day he was hunting for some food, up through the ground came a bubbling crude.
Oil, that is.
Texas
Black gold.
tea.
Texas tea.
See, we know it. I read these things out in a sonorous, poetic voice. And unfortunately, quite a few less old people they thought I was doing it legitimately. I mean, I'd announced these poems as coming from the great New York beat poet from the 1960s, Kazanowski or something like that, and even gingered it up by having in the comment section an angry comment from his granddaughter or something saying, Kazanowski was not like that, he was a good man. But I'd kind of parked those videos. They're around there somewhere. I mean, a lot of those theme songs made quite good poetry. Like, Green Acres is a place to be. Did you ever see that show? About a lawyer who moves into the country.
What they did show a lot in the Arizona jail was Rawhide, is it?
Oh, yeah, with Clint Eastwood.
With the cowboys, I think.
Yeah. And the Rawhide song is a classic.
Yeah.
It was made even more popular by being sung by the Blues Brothers in that movie.
Ah.
And it's got whip cracking sounds in it.
Yeah.
Any song with whip cracking,
Can you do the sounds?
Well, no, I can't do a whip crack. Maybe that'll come through. I don't know. In fact, there was in the comedy Blazing Saddles, they used whip cracking sounds to make ironic. What was his name? Frankie Lane. He used to be the great singer of Westernish gibberish songs. Quite a good voice for it. But we digress.
You can catch that on David's channel in the description box.
Yeah. And you better be late at night and you better be drunk. No other way you can take that stuff. I think I got 2 comments. You don't look well, David. Shadow, boom shadow. That was part of it, So, Christiania, yes. I was about to tell everybody that if you go there just to buy a bit of stock or just to be a tourist, nose around, perhaps get one of their irritating bicycles. Don't use the main gates. There's a couple of policemen whose job is just to sit over there watching the place. If you go around 2 corners, there's a little skinny entranceway. It just looks a bit rubbishy with a few weeds growing around it and iron bars. But you can slip in the side that way. No, these bits of information you might think are utterly trivial, but I get a lot of mail over those. Where's that gate? Well, I haven't said that one yet. Now, the people in there, including who's dead now that I can talk about? Pierre Mons, it's with a G. Anyway, it doesn't matter who they were. Floyd. They were kind of Christiania nobility. They'd been there in the early days. They'd fought the battles in the streets with the police. They'd hidden the stuff. They'd even built the tunnel that crosses the river underneath from the place. Or is that known yet? Sorry. And they weren't entirely hippie-ish. They'd had a kind of duplex place they'd converted out of a factory with big open spaces and all of that kind of thing. So this was the story I heard and what I was there for. They went, we can't leave here. No. We'd join Emil in prison if we go out. Okay, so stay. But we don't know what happened. Is it somebody here? Somebody we don't trust? Maybe you can find out. Wait, what am I? Joe Detective? No. Why would I know? You know Russians. Well, it's true. I had let it be known that I knew Russians. We'll come to that. And it was 12 tons of hash arranged by a Pakistani guy in the middle, but he lives here in England. And the ship was obtained through Lithuanians and Russians. Now, I mean, don't you get the feeling, as I'm describing this, that let's just say you're Mr. Big Enough in Scandinavia, and you really like the idea of having 12 tons of hash floating around Christiania or somebody nearby. I mean, these are not huge economies. You'd be surprised what they can take. And it's already so high priced there. It's not like it's going to go backwards to the supermarket in the Dam, as they refer to Amsterdam. But the downside too is that the class of smugglers and organized crooks are limited. There's the Christiania kind of crowd, that background, or 2 groups of bikers, Hells Angels and Banditos, who, of course, you'd know it, are at war with each other. Though they tend to focus on speedier type mind-altering substances. So, okay, and now the reason I can't just go and see Emil in prison, because this is what happens in that part of the world. If you're arrested, you go straight away into a section of the prison which is on isolation. You don't see any other. Well, you might see them walking around through as they open the door to give you food, but the officers bring the food around in a kind of bain-marie trolley. The only exercise you get is half an hour each day in a special yard, which is a big circular thing, but divided like the sections of an orange so that it's one person to each. And no talking. There's a tap code and a grunt code. But surprisingly, if you think, the hell with that, and start talking to the guy next door, you miss out your exercise for the next day. They've had a bit of a battering of from the European Union over it, but often it went on for a long time. On one case, Emil, who's older than I am, if you can imagine such a creature, he'd spent 22 months on this isolation. Now, a visit? Forget about it. Papers from the court? No, you're not going to get. You don't get to see your charge papers, except in the presence of your lawyer, and he can't give you a copy. Nothing to remain in the prison. If you want to visit, yeah, sure, you can have one. It's going to be in the police station, in the very investigative office in which the officers who arrested you are part of. So they approve whoever comes to see you, and
they get to listen in.
They get to listen in, and you're not allowed to talk about the case. So, I mean, they're not bad about it. I've often asked myself in this very chair, I'd be saying, Shaun, I wondered at the time what it'd be like to be in Supermax. Or I'd say, Shaun, I wondered what it'd be like to be in some Asian hellhole. And you know what? The question gets answered, doesn't it? Anyway, I won't jump ahead too far here. Because, I mean, I've been through a lot, but the world's changing a little bit. The kind of writing was on the wall even in 1999. It was the first from 96. I'd seen that it was going to be a digitized world. Computers were going to be significant in a much bigger way, and even the criminal world would naturally gravitate that way. And the earlier one, thought about it, the more understanding one would have. And as all viewers of your channels and various things, they want understanding, don't they?
Absolutely.
Indeed. And lucky you're here to provide that. And your range of reprobate guests. I met, there was no way to see Emil and ask him what he could contribute. And what's the point? He's in prison. He's not going to be able to tell me anything. The people involved told me all they knew, and it just seemed more and more confusing. And I'm not surprised they wanted an outsider to. Now, why would I be doing this? Why anything? I was kind of looking for an excuse to look up my old Russian mates. So that seemed like interesting. And they were going to pay me, of course. They're very good payers, the Scandinavians, even in the criminal world. They get paid for lots of stuff. They have people who look after their things. They don't like self-storage places, for example. There's not many of them, only a couple. Generally speaking. And they don't like hiding things in places. They want somebody responsible for it. But it shows you how honest, even within the crook world, that they can be. Because, can you imagine you had, 25 family-sized jars of ecstasy tablets. And you didn't really want to leave them around the house. I know, I'll give them to Blind Freddy. He'll look after them. Nobody knows him. He's only got his granny. The thought would not even, if it crossed your mind, the next scene would be Blind Freddy being held up by two policemen as he feverishly tries to squash all of these ecstasy tablets down his throat. Or Blind Freddy beat up in an alleyway someplace because he's been a bit short of a quid and decided to sell a few jars. And the next time you see Blind Freddy, apart from sporting a black eye and a sad face, you open the cupboard and say, Freddy, I think I'm going to have to make a connection between the state of you and the empty cupboard here. No, we wouldn't consider it, but they do that kind of thing there. So the ship's name was the Kvedana, which is hard to say and hard to find. It had sailed from Guadalajara port down in the Arabian Sea, and it had went through a transshipment at the Dubai's Jebel Ali Free Trade Zone, which is kind of like world travelers. The Colon, which is in Panama City. Have you heard of that one?
Mm-mm.
If you're a ship owner and you go through Panama, you can unload your goods because, say, it's going to another ship heading the other way or something. And instead of unloading them in a country as such, they have a free trade zone. And in Panama, it's called the Colon. And it's like a little sub-city. It's got a gate and everything. And you can rent a warehouse. And electricity and running water. What more could you possibly want? Good sewerage system, I guess. That's what a canal's for. It's got a bit of reputation, Colon. And, well, Yebel Ali Free Trade Zone has too, but I knew Basha from shipping in there. So that was helpful. Yeah, I can tell you're wondering how much I was going to get paid. Not a huge amount, but I mean, it was like 20,000, which would have been welcome at the time. Yeah, not krona, that's 200,000 krona. They have 1,000 krona notes. Quite big ones.
What's that worth in pounds?
100 quid. All right. I think there's still £100 Scottish notes. Have they withdrawn those?
I don't know. We should
They were for a long, long time.
It'd make life easy if we had £100 notes, wouldn't it?
Yeah, people are so worried about forgeries, though, aren't they? I mean, even a 50. Every time you get one, some idiots rip the corner of it to see whether the forgers have conquered that metallic strip thing a long time ago.
And then you try spending it. Got to get my manager's approval.
Even a 20 gets rubbed with something or scanned. There is no kind of say. But in spending power, yes, it would be useful. I mean, a 20 now is what a tenner used to be in spending terms. So
just for inflation.
It doesn't matter much. But I did kind of have some reservations as to whether this was wise. I was sitting in a cafe eating a creme caramel. What, you say? Yes, because it sort of trembled on the plate and was pale. And I was reminded then of something else kind of pale and sensing to tremble, was something I totally misunderstood back in Pakistan when he'd had a kind of dispute with another politician, shall we call him that? I mean, gangsters, but they invent a political party, and some of them are quite ridiculous in a way. There's still a group of people who follow, let me see if I got this right. You might have heard of the Bhutto family. There was Ali Bhutto, used to be prime minister over there. He got executed by the general. Daughter Benazir was prime minister a couple of times. Brought in a death penalty thing over drugs. I didn't like her so much after that. But anyway, her husband became another prime minister. So the whole Bhutto family was a big thing. And one of the other sons was a guy killed in Paris. They say he was poisoned. It's like the Kennedys in a crazy way, sort of Asian version of the Kennedys. Yeah, things are going a bit slow in the popularity. Have one of us knocked off, That always works. And the one who died in Paris had a wife. She's a Lebanese woman. They say all sorts of terrible things about her over there. But believe it or not, she had her own political party. And so some of these gangsters attach themselves to something like that. So, but Nurjan, people are not finding this confusing, but play it back a couple of times. I'm still in Scandinavia, but I'm reminded in a cautionary way of a meeting that took place between his lordship and his declared enemy. Very kind of tense meeting in one of those dark houses there with the drapes drawn and the furniture with the plastic on them and all of that, and the gooey confectionery cake on the table. I could half follow what was going on, but I kind of excused myself to have a little snoop around and noticed a couple of guys pouring. I'd seen it before. They run a little still down there, and they make a kind of cheap vodka. So it's a living bit of bootlegging. It's not completely outlawed alcohol in Pakistan. If you're a Christian, you can buy from a Christian alcohol shop, and they make a local beer, which is not too bad. Anyway, the other thing in my snooping I saw down at the enemy of my friend place was I opened a big freezer expecting this was where they kept the alcohol. But I looked in and there were a lot of plucked pigeons or something wrapped up in cling film. And I'd said later on after the meeting, I'd said, is there some game shooting around here or something like that? What? No. Are you kidding? Not down the coast? No, nothing. No, I didn't really bring it up. If I'd had the sense to say something. See, the point was, Nurjan was being pushed into this meeting because a lot of his, while he was in prison, before he got bailed out, a lot of people he knew that had been guarantors for bail had been disappearing. Documents were coming back signed in their name and all of that. And, he wasn't accusing the other guy of doing something to them, but kidnapping somebody and keeping them for a while to get them to sign over a house or go guarantor for one of your cronies who's in prison as a bail application. Yeah, there are lots of uses people can be put to in that regard if they're property owners. And why does the creme caramel in Copenhagen remind me of a plucked pigeon in a fridge? Because it wasn't a plucked pigeon, of course, was it? Can you guess what that was I saw?
Human parts.
Indeed, they were the hands of Nurjan's missing friends.
The heads.
Hands.
Hands.
Yes, the hands. Why the hand? Because all documents there had to have the thumbprint. So they'd be partially thawed. The thumbprint would go down on the document. And then they'd be bailing people out, going guarantor for loans, doing all sorts of transactions, even though they were not just handless, but everythingless, and part of the Macron coast. And I was thinking of this because I was saying to myself, from small things, big trouble can come. Nonetheless, I finished my creme caramel because survival means never missing a meal, Shaun. I don't have to tell you that.
Or reach for a banana.
Yeah. It can. I mean, one of the things that struck me about in your books was often the reference to terrible food that you had to endure from Sheriff Arapio, or what's his name?
Arpaio. Sheriff Joe Arpaio.
I'll just have a little sip of my cappuccino this morning. I made it.
And don't forget, David's links are in the description box, including his channel link. If you want to fall asleep listening to that soothing, eloquent voice.
I think a lot of people do fall asleep. I should do bedtime stories.
You should. Well, please subscribe before you do fall asleep listening to his soothing, eloquent voice.
Yeah. Okay. Nonetheless, undeterred, I moved on. Now, I had a couple of the Lithuanian guys' names. This ship had been intercepted in northern European waters in what seemed to be a bit of a fight between various agencies who all had something to say about it. The British didn't really want the ship, but they were quite happy to arrest on a conspiracy charge the English guy who'd supplied or arranged the supply of this stuff over there. The main bulk of the trial ended up in Copenhagen because that's where there were enough Lithuanians and enough Danes and Christiania people to arrest and throw in jail. But they wouldn't be heard of before the actual trial. I mean, they treat you quite well afterwards, but you don't get to hear much otherwise. Actually, it's quite creepy. But here was the thing. I'd left it for about 3 weeks because after something's happened, if you're near or standing close or friends or something, there's been a big arrest, don't run in straight away in some kind of panic trying to find out and do and fix and save, because it won't help and it'll still be fresh in the investigators' minds. You need them to settle down a bit. So I left it for, I think it was about 3 weeks, something like that, and kind of quietly coaxed Eloise back into the fold, as it were. Had she changed? Not really. Hair looked different. It was bigger. It was kind of 80s hair.
Dallas and Dynasty.
Yeah, well, it certainly had the size.
John Collins.
Like kind of Indian chief, headwear. Big chief ain't no more. Anyway, boyfriend. But she never liked to travel. I mean, she definitely on planes. But I did manage to get her into Copenhagen, and I thought I can't really even leave her. I had a meeting, but I couldn't leave her alone. So I had an old school teacher, friend of mine that lived there, and he was so nice and cuddly. I said, Peter, take Eloise out for lunch or something. A bit of shopping, Orleans, it's a big shop there. Go in there, whatever. Just keep her damn well busy until 3 o'clock. Yeah, she stood by this. No, where's she? No, I want to go back to the hotel. So she's already there by the time I've made my excuses, saying I'm going down to for a walk around the block and have a coffee or some damn thing, But I walked back in, like in my overcoat, clearly having come from somewhere else. Oh, and you know why? Extra clearly, because still in my hand, because I'm in the process of switching it off, is the distinctive little black box with the 2 or 3 sometimes antennae poking up. What is it? It's that thing. Fellow should always have a meeting with unknowns. It's a jammer of all radio traffic. It jams all cellular phones and all frequencies from about 100 megacycles up. In fact, they don't even use all the bugs and transmitters and radio mics had that are way above that, usually UHF or bigger. And it even had a little switch on this, which had a high-pitched frequency that you couldn't hear above 16K, but it would be so loud to the microphones, their automatic thing that sets the recording volume would go into overdrive, and they'd miss most of the conversation because it was down. It's a bit like those things you get for your car, which has got infrared lights on it, and so the car number plate can't be read from behind by those pesky freelance speed camera guys. I presume there are such a thing. I wouldn't say you do this against the police. No, we want the help. Often I think that. So this wasn't a good image, me coming back in a detective's Macintosh and sporting what looked like the head of the devil glowing and pinging red lights like eyes, and with its horns of black. So, but there was always patching up with her. But I, before I started my, the next place to go was Moscow and the Russians. So I thought the one thing that, I'd met Emil's wife, and she said that he did keep a storage box, a locker, a little room somewhere. Now, there's only 2 places around town, or there was at that time in Copenhagen, that you could do that. One you'd never use if your life depended on it. A notorious, if it had been back in wartime, he'd be the kind of guy that would inform on Jews to the Nazis. I mean, he had post boxes there, but he was always in them, going through people's mail. And luckily, he'd made such a pest of himself ringing the police with hot tips. They used to put the phone down on him. But I'm not going to go there. This other one was down near the airport, but it wasn't like there was anything. I said to Emily's wife, was there stuff in there or what? Let me know. No. It's just he's got all his paintings or something in there. Yeah, really. Well, I'm not going to. There were some documents that was the dangerous thing, supposedly. I mean, you're going to buy the story. It's a bit like some scammer, I suppose, who says this whole thing is not about emptying your bank account. It's about it's a document fraud or something. I mean, people at the moment apparently. Frauds of that kind, scams, are so huge at the moment. 1.5 billion or something is known to have been relieved from people falling for telephone scams, all sorts of stuff. Like, do you ever get? You must get those text messages, don't you? That purport to be from HSBC, a bank, or HMRC, tax and revenue, somewhere, saying unless your name's been put on a bad list, somebody's into your account, and they have a link. Now, the fact that this came from a mobile phone should tip off most people. I mean, really, you're not falling for this, people, surely. But what would put the nail in the coffin on it would be that the link that's supposed to save you from all sorts of trouble, like having your internet disconnected or whatever it might be, is a kind of made-up link. It's got words in it that sound like this morning's, which is HSBC secure line or something like that, something encouraging, but with dots all over the place. I mean, you click on that link, you're just opening yourself up to it. So somewhere back in Fraud Nation, there's the smoke screen that something's a documentary or getting money out of a bank in Africa. Now, Emil was a friend, so I didn't really think anything hugely of it, but I wasn't going to be running around with his stuff, artworks or documents or whatever. But I didn't know he had a lot of paintings, so I said to his wife, you can't do it? No, they're all over me, waiting for me to attend to his affairs. Well, what's the documents? The documents are... it shows the trail of some of the money that went to buy the ship and all of that. Okay, sort of. Well, what do we do when there's something in the storage locker somewhere around, or a little room, or whatever it might be, rented, and you've got to get in there and play with it, but you don't want to be known for having done so? Any solutions come to mind? Well, what are you thinking about? As you think upon that, and as look, there's a viewer out there who's actually caught onto it. Well done,
James. Joe, solutions come to mind?
No, that other viewer has got himself in trouble. He's gone in there pretending to be the guy who's like, no, that won't work. What you do is you go to the place and rent your own locker.
Oh.
They give you the grand tour. You know the number of the one you're interested in. And you say, as you near the number, that's about the size I need. Yeah. Have you got any like that? That doesn't. Well, there's one empty in this little stretch of the thing. Well, which side? So you narrow it down as close as you can, and you rent one yourself there. Now, most people who have things in lockers like that you have combination locks on there, because the day might come when they want to give away all their money. I mean, have a friend come and look after things. Get themselves in more trouble. Oh, God. Or sensibly leave the damn thing there, and if it was, it was going to get taken, it would have done so already. Nonetheless, I rather unhappily went there and rented a place, eyed off the one. He hasn't put a combination lock on it. She doesn't know, his wife, what the number is. So stuck? No, it's an ordinary padlock, which, as people probably know, so it's no great secret, you only need an old Coca-Cola tin and cut out a strip about 5 millimeters by 12 or 10, a bit longer, so you can get a grip on the thing, and slide it around the bolt that locks on and push it down into it. And skinny enough, it'll go in there and pop it open.
And just use a razor blade to cut that out.
A hobby knife's a bit stronger. A razor blade's not really
like a
strong
Stanley
enough.
knife or something.
Yeah. Box cutter, as the Americans like to say. In fact, they're good for a lot of things, little strips of metal.
Such as?
Well, those things, sometimes, can you imagine you've rented a holiday home and the key, they've told you, is in one of those little boxes on the wall, the lock safe, yeah. And lo and behold, you've lost the number to it. And incredibly, you can't get a hold of them. And astonishingly, there's no way around it, because you need to get in your place before you need to get in and relax on your holiday at Airbnb. So you take the same strip I just described, but get some toenail cutters and cut a little notch out of one end. But this time you're not curling it around, you're keeping it straight. You poke the thing down the right-hand side of this master lock, or whatever they damn well call themselves, and rotate the wheels up one at a time until you feel a click. Now, don't be a sucker. That's not the number that you see in front of you. It's the number on the opposite side. And it depends on the size of the wheel, but you'll find, having played with it for a minute, that a 6 is opposite a 2 or something like that, and a 3 is opposite a 7. So that's the number you want. So you just work your way down one by one. You've been given the number, you dial it to the opposites, bing, it's open.
Wow.
So, their accommodation problem solved. However, locker problem not entirely solved, because I had to kind of choose a moment, and place was all cameraed up. But reasonable fortune, the doorway of the one I'd chosen happened to kind of, when it was open, had covered the doorway of his. So relative to where the camera was, they wouldn't necessarily see me going in there. Okay, fine. Anyway, my fears were unwarranted. The said papers were kind of in there. They weren't very incriminating, but I took those with me to get rid of them. The paintings, I don't know what I wanted to keep them. I couldn't see any point in it. I gave them a pretty good check, so it wasn't a painting with like an inch of cocaine or something. In any event, I just made sure I could pay out more of his and leave them there. But I still wanted to keep an eye on the place, so and I had nothing in mind, so I emptied those out and put empty cardboard boxes in mine to look like there was something, and sealed it up. But I had some other plan for that next time in town. In fact, I had to go to what's that place where they used to sell all electronic gear. It's near a big tube station. It'll come to me. It's a street name near Google, not Google. Anyway, It's down where a huge paper chase shop is. Tottenham Court Road, that's it. You'd be floating. I mean, where are these memories? I mean, that you're groping around for something and you've sent little, minions up there to go and find some thing you're trying to think of, and you get it. What the hell's going on? And there's some secret operation going on in our brains? Unfortunately, there is. Mine is mostly a bunch of very stupid people. Okay. The reason I refer us now to Tottenham Court Road is because having sent Eloise down to Paper Chase to buy a whole lot of, she's interested in some art, she'd put murals all over her flat, was to buy a whole lot of paper and paints and stuff, and it's something to keep her busy while I got into the electronic shops and bought myself what I'd need for over there for the lockers, which was just something I could monitor it. Now here's the second part of our problem. We've got into the locker, but how do we keep an eye on it? We want to know if anybody's got an interest in us sniffing around. Also, we want to know if anybody's got an interest in our friend who's got one next door.
Surveillance device, then.
Yeah, but it has to be self-contained and not too elaborate. Now, what it was simply an ordinary infrared alarm detector, but what that would do was link to a auto dialer on a mobile phone. So if the sensor went off, it would dial a number. And what number? The number went, it was a glorious thing in the good old days. It was a contractless, nameless, over-the-counter pager. You bought it, and part of the number to ring in was a premium number, so that's how they made their money. Not on the device, but the service. They'd take your messages and so on. But you could also, your message giver could simply ring you and use the DTMF, the beep, beep, beep sounds from a mobile keypad. And put 666 or something on there.
I remember all those pager codes.
Yeah, and alert you to something or other. In 1471 used to be somebody got in somewhere they shouldn't have. So that's the idea. Somebody goes in snooping around. It'll trigger the auto dialer before they can do anything about it. It's rung it through. My pager goes off. And I know. So all that's in place. But I think I got caught on that one too, because by the time I got back to Eloise, she's got one sheet of A4 paper or something in a plastic bag. Where's all the boxes of Newton and Abbott finest oils and all of that? No, wasn't having any of that. The recovery position for her was a normal state of affairs, But I then went to Moscow because the Lithuanians hadn't really said anything, but I knew they were kind of hiding something, and I'd been down to the docklands down there in Copenhagen. They have a kind of pen which is behind not particularly secure chicken wiring, which has the boats that haven't paid tax and things that have been seized. And the Kvednano was down there. Apparently there were a few claims on it. My friend in Dubai, Bashar, told me that they'd put in phony paperwork on paying for the refuel on it. So, they're traveling, leaving a trail, as it were, anyway. And I took a couple of pictures of it because I didn't want to be hanging around an impounding dock, with a camera. Phones weren't so good in those days for taking pictures. But I thought that'd be... it might tell me something. And sort of did when I looked on the computer at the digitized picture. If I cranked up the saturation, where Kvadnana was painted over, it did look like there was another name under there somewhere, or had been. Okay, so Lithuanians aren't going to help, so Moscow it is that I go. Yeah, right. Now, who is it I'm seeing? I'm seeing Andreas. Andreas, you remember Andreas?
This is one of the best stories in the whole series. Was the Russians in the prison?
Well, just to outline that for people who can't be bothered searching around for it, and for the wider picture on this, how are we doing for time? We still okay?
Yeah, we're fine.
No, good.
Plenty of time.
Andreas and his little Moscow street gang go way back, or did. And it kind of ties in with history here. They, back in the Soviet Union days, this was before Glasnost, not that anybody remembers that, before, what's his name with a stain over his head?
It was Gorbachev.
Yeah, Gorbachev, yeah. Loosened up things, and before the Berlin Wall came down, to be a criminal as such in the Soviet Union was a very isolated and narrow thing to be. It was certainly nothing like what we'd imagine. A street gang is what they kind of loosely called them back then.
With very unique tattoos.
Yes. They had a kind of a code. I forget the name for it. It sounds like the word paranoia, but in Russian, paranoia or something like that. It really doesn't translate very well anyway, because the word only means notions or thoughts or something. But what it is a collection of principles, as it were, that come up through living in prisons. So all of these jail babies who have grown up a bit in the system. Now, in the Russian prison system, there's 3 levels, at least. Then none of them are particularly good. But for example, the people who are lifers, murderers, mass rapists or something, if anybody had the energy for that, they would go to a high-level prison, and conditions are very tough there. Like, even if you move from one place to another, 2 guards come along and you're bent over double and frog marched in a very uncomfortable position. Oh, when they open the door for a high-security prisoner there, before they come in, even if they're doing a search, the prisoner has to go over to one wall and kind of prostrate himself against the side of the wall. But Andreas and his bunch were not. They were Moscow people, so I suppose in terms of street gangs, they're a little bit more sophisticated, but not much. It's still a very streety thing. The local cops know them. How do they make their money? They're not even in the class where they had a big black market goods thing going on. I mean, that's quite a classy thing by comparison. All they had was toughness. That's their only virtue. And they had this sort of early jail code or whatever. It's full of gibberish rules, but and one of them is that if somebody you can't be a member of it if you'd been raped in prison. They're excluded completely. So I guess they keep a lot of secrets. Anyway, but they'd really make their money by extortion from local traders. And there'd be other people trying to extort money from local traders. So they'd have to be tougher than that lot. So as I say, the only thing they had going for them is really toughness. Now, in 1988, Andreas's gang is quite biggish. When I say big, it's over 10 and alive and out at the same time, but they weren't out for long. And one thing that, because they were at mid-level of prisoners, not at the really harsh end, they were allowed in the prison cities, which have names like Perm 39 and Perm 18. It's like the whole town is based on this 10,000 strong prison. That's the industry. The civilians who live and work in that town are all part of the prison network.
Like Solzhenitsyn.
Yeah, he like one of the gulags, I suppose. And they have little things they're allowed to do. Sometimes they can have that sauna once a month, and they can have visits to the women's section and have the odd marriage in there too. And so they've got a kind of a life. But so it was a bad thing when half of Andreas's group was sent to another prison city, and he'd already fought it out within that prison itself to be fairly much at the top, which is no slight thing to do. As you know yourself, you can't, to dominate in a prison, you can't necessarily be the one who does the action. You can't be known as one who ordered a murder, for example, or for somebody to slip in the shower and never recover, or choke on a chicken bone, which is stuck in the side of their head. Because the authorities will say, this is a bit much. We'll, move him to there and split up the group. So you have to do it in a ruthless but thoughtful way. And I guess a ruthless yet thoughtful is what Andreas had going for him. And he did he asked to be transferred with his guys to the other one, or they to him, and sometimes they would have gone along with it, but I think they just didn't want them all together. That would be too much of a handful. Or they were friendly with the opposition. I mean, who knows? Anyway, they didn't go along with it, and Andreas wasn't taking any of that. So now the reason you don't hear much about breakouts from those sort of prisons is that, generally speaking, there's nowhere to go. It's not like they're all in Siberia, but they are in quite isolated zones, and you don't. If you stole a vehicle, it would stand out. Now, bear in mind, this is the Soviet era, and this makes quite a big difference to what happens next. Andreas, from where he is, breaks out of the prison. Now, that is not an astonishing thing, because you could kind of do that, but because they didn't take. I mean, sure, there was a wall and somebody watching and an alarm and everything, but they didn't really worry about that too much, because where are they going to go? All they do is setting themselves up for a beating when they get caught. It's not a big concern. But he's thought this through, and is in a place where it's not a drive-to town, they have an airport. Not only that, he sort of bungled this bit up, but there were some apparatchiks, or what do you call, so deputy heads around in the area, or so he thought or heard, and he thought they might be a bit more cooperative when he made demands. And why could he make demands? Because he and the boys, having broken out, have gone straight to the airport, the opposite way to where anybody would think they'd go, because it's back in, crossing into town, and straight out. The airports are not sure, they had a fence and a gate, but it wasn't massive high security, and it's not like they had a modern facilities where there's a finger connecting to the plane or anything. Straight onto the tarmac at the flight they had in mind, and the reason they had this one it was a relative long haul, so it was a slightly bigger Tupolev. I think I can't remember, it was with a 138 or something sizable anyway. And just because the stairs are still into position and there's still passengers boarding on that, that was their bit of luck, but that was about it. They got on there and said that they wanted to be. It was the prison's own fault. They never reunited them back. This is their demand. Now the authorities, of course, say, "Well, yeah, all right, you get what you'll all be back together." No, we don't. They kind of realised there's no proper end game to this, so they fool around for a while, trying to think of solutions, but the plan all along that Andreas didn't really tell the other guys because they would have thought this will never work, is to close it up. They've got at least 16 people on board who are, well, we'll call them civilians, but people who flew planes in the Soviet era were barely civilians. They were people in government. So there's a bit of some good fortune. And one of them is high enough up so it matters as to what happens to him. It's still relatively early in the morning, so the plane's up in the air and they're giving the orders. This wasn't all just accepted straight away. This is, a couple of unpleasant-looking remains were thrown off the top of the ramp to be convincing. I mean, the authorities are fine. They're going to kill all these people anyway, but they don't want to. And the story isn't anywhere as yet. It's all. You can imagine Soviet-era Russia is nothing. It's contained. But when the plane is forced to land at the other prison city where the rest of the gang is, this is not entirely good. But one on board who's a bit higher up says, all right, they were offered all sorts. There was like half a day's worth of tricks to try and get them to go into the other prison or keep some hostages. It went to the limits of my comprehension of all the variables that took place, but they ended up with the rest of the gang, or most of them. I think one missed out, back on there, and that was given the okay by the slightly higher up one. And the authorities didn't want to really identify this guy, but they were in communication through the captain, but they'd spotted that. The co-pilot had come out a couple of times and spoken to a guy, and they realized that this guy matters. Now, the others have come out. They've got them onto the plane, but they say that they're going to. The thing's fueled up a bit, but they have, and quite a bit to. They say they want to go back to Moscow where they came from. They'll turn themselves in, and the high up one has to be make sure that he's in good shape. But they're listening to the communications between the radio tower and the captain, so they don't. It's really hard to get too much on, and even they were smart enough not to let anybody go up those stairs except those who mattered. They weren't going to have like some escort or food delivery or anything like that. I think there were some things that were delivered to it, but they were left down. Anyway, they take off ready to go to Moscow, and they won't leave until. That's right. Yeah. The guy gave the one who counted signaled from the window that this is okay. Go along with that. They get up into the air. Now, they did land at not Moscow proper airport, but they have another little place like, in the UK we use Stansted for all hijackings, and every, where is it in the United States? If you hijack a plane and fly in, you don't go to JFK. If you're around that area, I think you go to Bangor, Maine or something. It's where one reason or another you get directed. I think it's there. People no doubt correct me as to where your life will come to an end in the hijacking game, but I even know which one it is in Pakistan. It's Hyderabad. They managed to get back up into the air at Moscow. Now, the reason that they're being a little bit more cooperative than you'd imagine Russians would be is that because not only are there's some people that matter who are on that flight. Now, if this were today, I wouldn't think it would be the same because the flight would be composed of probably much more regular people. And who matters in Russia anymore? It depends how you're going that week with old Vladimir. They're allowed to take off because the guy gives his hand signal again, the big cheese. It should be said that he wasn't entirely giving that hand signal of his own free will. Andreas had picked up on what was saving their bacon that day. And he wasn't entirely, the big guy was not entirely alive, I think is the word I'm groping for at the time. So there's a bit of glove puppetry going on there at that window.
The hands again.
Yeah. Come to haunt me.
The leitmotif.
Now, I didn't know any of all this stuff until I met them in Pakistan, when I myself had been kind of disappeared to Hyderabad prison. And I had mentioned before I met them, and it was so extraordinary to find. I mean, there were no real foreigners to speak of, but these were the foreigners that I was directed to there. And there were some of the gang left. They'd got back into Pakistan, and they chose that because it was being run back in '88 by General Zia al-Haq, who was kind of against everybody. So it didn't do them very much good. They ended up with a life sentence, but they realized that that wasn't a really good thing to be. They wanted to get rid of them at some point, so the appeal courts reduced that to 10. Now, when I came across them, they were, and in fact, I had met, some of them had been sent back earlier. They didn't want them all back on a plane at the same time, but they were coming to the end of it, and they'd had quite a rough or adventurous time in prison. They'd fought guards. They'd killed a couple of those. I mean, it's strange again. You'd think their lives would have been over before that, but amongst prisoners, they'd killed, I don't know. Nobody had an accurate figure on that, but I know it was at least 16. And so they weren't to be trifled with.
What did they look like, these guys?
Well, Andreas was not big. He had that Slavic muscularity, though. You know, that solid thing. You could feel you could punch him a lot and it wouldn't do any good. Reminded me of a schoolboy nemesis of mine in primary school called Konstantinsky. Other kids could fight a kid fight, you know, baff, baff, baff. But Konstantinsky was kind of like, he was a guy who was in Charles Bronson, who was, I think it was Polish or Czech or something originally. Bukowski or something was his real last name. Anyway, it had that kind of dense muscularity Andreas had. And of course, as I mentioned before, he had been in hunger strikes, which involved force feeding and daily beatings or something, which meant nothing to him. But that was just part of it. It's strange they wouldn't take certain things, but if it was part of what the thing that happens when you do such and such, I mean, wouldn't take a beating from a guard, but if it was part of what happened to you when, if you get whipped when you're on a hunger strike, that's part of it, so you accept that. I mean, very rules-based. But he wasn't going to accept being force-fed. That was clearly not within the code. And that had come up because I'd asked him about the gaps in his teeth. His premolars were all missing, top, bottom, both sides. And that's because of the feeding device, which was a jaw-clamping steel contraption shoved in to keep your passageways open long enough to put the tube down to send in these watery dal or whatever it is that's going to keep you alive. But he didn't think much of that and clamped down with his, again, strong Slavic jaw muscles as though chewing 8 million bubblegum or something like that, and crushed his own teeth, which would take some doing. And I think, too, that because he was the focus of his group, that meant something.
Did they have a look in their eyes, like a dangerous look?
No, oddly enough, just sort of friendly. At one stage, I was trying to get Andreas a passport. Because he later on, after I got out of Hyderabad, he was sent down to Karachi again, and he needed to. They'd taken him to the airport, but there was nobody there to meet him, and the local officials said, "Look, you're released in a sense, but you'll have to go back to the prison if you don't do something," which was a bit of money, but also he needed something resembling a passport. So we ran around trying to find anything, didn't matter what, but he wasn't around long enough for us to get the picture taken and properly. But anyway, we were friendly enough, and I was kind of curious of that. So with that background, they went back in, what would it have been? It's 98 or something like that. And at first it was literally to Siberian prisons. There were about 8 of them left alive. 2 died during all of this. There was a Vladimir amongst them, but he wasn't very memorable. Alexei was tall, and kind of... You could put them together. Look, if you put them together, you'd know you had a little gang on your hands. If you had them separately, you just think regular Russian, maudlin, alcoholic psychopath. Nothing unusual at all to see there, really.
Did they play chess?
No, they played it, but not very well, as far as I could tell. But I'll never really know because everybody made sure they lost to them, as they would. Here's this odd position they found themselves in. They didn't really serve particularly long for the hijacking, and I think the same reason they survived to get out of there with it was because it was a huge embarrassment. The case was barely reported. When I started looking, because it was 88, it was sort of pre-internet, really, so the records aren't around. But the Russian authorities certainly, they're bad enough when they lose a submarine, aren't they? They're not going to report that a bunch of prisoners have broken out of the prison, A, and then B, they've just gone to the airport, and C, they've taken a plane and left the country. No, they don't like that story. But here's what they missed. And as I met Andreas in, it's called Tversky Walkway. It's a kind of a cafe street of Moscow. What they missed out on was the huge transition. What would have happened if they'd stayed there in Russia? What happened to their friends, the people they knew? Massive things. As we know, there was the transition of leaders until Putin came along. But I remember talking about Putin, so there must have been at some stage he was. But it was after that. Boris Yeltsin was in for a while, wasn't he?
I remember with the tanks.
And they had the Russian White House, and that was defended and all of that. But it wasn't like they could go back to their old ways. I mean, they're 10 years older, but they were going back to something, and they wanted to be part of it. And we can look at it like this. All the people back from the Soviet era who had positions of anything had either been killed off or done well. Those who were in government, as you know, the KGB people either stayed there and called themselves something else, or they went into business. Anybody who had control over any state enterprise, particularly oil or minerals or whatever it might be, they all became big until they got too independent. They were kind of pounced upon. And we've got a few in London, expatriate ones living in fear of their Novichok. What does that mean anyway? Some silly Novichok. It means little one or stranger or it doesn't mean poison. Anyway, that's what it is. A nerve agent. I don't think I'd like to be fooling around with that, would you?
No, absolutely not.
Oh, what are you doing, Joe? Oh, I'm in the Novichok business. Oh, really? Yeah, well, I just put my fingers under here.
Plutonium's not a good way to go either, is it?
No. Anything that's going to eat away your organs. I don't know whether you ever caught up with that Chernobyl, the TV series. But it's worth watching. It's got a very authentic Russian feel. In fact, that's what, when I first got there, I loved every bit of it. I mean, my hotel was shit, but I quite liked it. I was looking at everything. I wanted to know why things looked Russian. What the PowerPoints were designed like, and was everything as chunky and brutalist as I thought. And a lot of things sort of were. And it hadn't been that long since. There'd been the transformations, of course, but that the sort of wild westish kind of new capitalism had settled a bit by that 10 years later.
What year were you there?
This was 2000.
Okay.
So, and that shows you how long Putin's been in power.
Yeah.
Because he must have been we were talking about him then. Of course, my friends all thought he was a good guy.
My parents went in the 80s for the Olympic Games.
Okay, but was it before 89? It would have been, wouldn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, it was the 1980 Games were Russia, weren't they?
My sister, when she was a little kid, won a painting competition in the Daily Mirror, and the prize was to go and watch the Olympic Games in Russia.
All right.
So
what did your parents think of the place?
Oh, yeah, they're blown away by it. Fascinating.
No, the food's crap, but then again, that's why they drink, I guess, a lot. But I think for us, everything's interesting, even if it's strange. And the stranger it is, the more interesting it is. So I found everything a distraction. I'd taken Russian at school because the school I was at had this kind of phony baloney language lab. You'd sit in a little place with a kind of padding like this so you could put the headphones on and learn the language. Well, the reason I took it was because I needed a place to sleep when I got there in the mornings too, because I'd had late nights. So I thought, well, I can't see what you're doing in the booth, so I'll take Russian. So I didn't really pick up much of it, except I do remember fondly my wonderful Russian language textbook, which painted the most glowing picture of a land of plenty. I mean, it showed vegetable markets and sort of shows and people always appearing to be in national dress of whichever region they came from. The Union was very big on Union at that time. And I'm sure former East Germans look back rather fondly for some mad reason at the certainties of that time. But perhaps that's all it was. There were some certainties. You had to wait 5 years for a telephone. It cost you 5,000 rubles or something, but I
remember showing us the videos of the bread queues. When I was a kid, bread queues.
Oh, yeah.
And they used to tell us that the Russians were going to drop nuclear bombs and we should have nuclear bomb shelters in our backyards.
There was a
There
popular
was
notion,
kind of a
wasn't
panic
it?
for nuclear bomb shelters.
It was very big in the US where people wanted to build their bunker.
Yeah.
Didn't they know that you could never come out of it? What is it, the half-life of some of those dangerous particles? Is that like 40,000 years or something? Yeah. It's quite a bit of catching up on your old videos to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
40,000 years. All right, still. Anyway, it was kind of as distracted as I was only really meant to be there for a couple of days. But rather than mix up two stories at once, just deal with the ship that I was tasked to find out. It was Andreas who said that the Lithuanian was well known in what's that chunk of Russia that's separated by a bit of land? Is it starts with a K? Kalinsk, something. It'll come to me again. But it seemed, and you could, that ship, and you could see it from the picture I'd taken, was originally the Antonis. It had been used for cigarette smuggling and other things, and had been seized in this other, it sounds like Kalinisk. Anyway, been seized in that port with a whole lot of stolen BMWs on it, and the Lithuanians were involved. So when they arranged the purchase of this boat, instead of getting one that didn't have a history, they got one that was already known.
Hot boat.
Yeah. And there were some other kind of unpleasant things about it. From my point of view, it seems the reason that there was such a big fuss over which agencies were going to be behind it, that this ship was tracked from the time it was in the Gulf, in the Arabian Sea, and went up through that way, past Socotra Island and all of that. And it was tracked by the Americans, who had taken a renewed interest in things in the Middle East that once didn't affect them much. It only affected their allies. It's a bit like, they've always been directly or indirectly involved in everywhere from Syria to Jordan to Israel and so on, but they weren't. I think it was the USS Cole had been rammed by a couple of people, and that was just about this time. So, of course, suicide attackers are nothing new. They've been around since, I don't know, certainly since the 60s. I remember them. And one of the first ones that stuck in my mind was a Christian fundamentalist, oddly enough, from Lebanon. Kayla, she had got onto a plane at Beirut airport and blown it up with herself. So all of that was not new, but it was new ish to the Americans who didn't like the idea that a couple of rubber dinghies loaded with explosives could kill even one sailor aboard a big ship. Now, the ship was never in any danger, but they were down in that area and tracking shipping movements. So theirs was the first technical intervention on that, but they weren't going to get involved in what was, to them, clearly a smuggling thing. But because of the information they had on it, it was linked to Denmark and the Lithuanians and some Latvians and Russians, of course, because this boat was bought back out of being impounded at a relatively cheap rate, so that the Christianian folk, they had very deep pockets for funding things. They knew it was going to be a kind of $500,000 operation anyway. Didn't blanch at the thought. But, I mean, you'd have to expect, if there was any profiteering to be done, and somebody says, "Oh, yes, we've got a ship that's going to cost $120,000," that particular gift horse, you want to look straight in the mouth and see what's wrong with it. But I eventually said to Emil, "Look, I mean, didn't you feel uncomfortable? There were so many people that you couldn't check out in this." Yeah, but you've got to try things to see it. I don't know. I mean, bad things have happened to me, but I never went on the basis of try it and see it'll work. And that lot. Now, all of these people, I did ask, how he was fitting in, Andreas, but not terribly well. I thought of them as, I've spoken about the Wild West before, but I thought of them a bit like those old cowboys in the Wild Bunch movie. Now, that was where they were all Wild West bandits, but they were getting on. And it was 1912 or something where that's set, and they're just behind the times. I think it was the first Western I've seen where people use automatic pistols, because that Colt 911, the famous 45, that goes back to then. So, and in the film, those people never worked out and were kind of worn down and annihilated and went out with it. And okay, a couple of the guys had been sensible enough to kind of feign an illness or something to get out of it, but Andreas never could. And even while I was there, the 2-day trip ended up being more like 10, because, well, I couldn't think. Was it a plan? Not much. If you want to do something in Iran, your only safe way of operating there is through a kind of the Soviet Union and the Russians had a kind of presence there all along, and they weren't as deeply suspicious. But I wanted to know a little bit more about, was there anything, as much as I admired their persistence and survivability, was there anything that was ever going to come of it? Because they just didn't have, the great skills. They'd missed the computer era. Now, the few people they knew from their old days had gone, either, as I said, had been kind of wiped off the map, or become quite big as open security companies that ended up more like extortion agencies than of the old days, or had started working for government people by sort of bullying their way into different enterprises. They weren't, I'm going to put it, they weren't chess players enough to see through how they were being manipulated by others. Because they still had their reputation, even their old friends who'd survived. I mean, you'd have to think about it. What kind of person is going to survive such transitions? They're going to be devious and manipulative and all of that. When, at the time they were hired, they were supposed to go and trash the apartment and not kill, but terrorize, rough up the brother of some. Oh, how can I explain it? One of their old friends had become a bit of a businessman. He had his own enterprises and building concerns and construction. He was up again. He wanted properties that had already been licensed to somebody else. He tried bribing the officials, but they were already being bought by their competitor. He wanted to, he told Andreas, to remind this other one that they were still part of the street gang dedicated group, and come what may, you're not going to succeed. We will end, or you will come to an end. Now, bear in mind, I've got, Andreas' English was never much good, and I'm getting bits of it, and I've got one of the guys as sort of translator, so not really getting enough of this information to be any good. And when I'd say things back, Andreas would say, David, you don't understand. No, this will be all right because of something or other. And it just seemed to me that why would they be going to rough up the guy's brother? You would rough him up. And okay, the brother was living in this apartment, but it didn't really add up. But they were so at a loss for a job and so wanting to demonstrate themselves, so that they went in there and they did a pretty good terrorizing job, and that had happened really about the next day after I arrived, and suddenly the mood had changed. I think they could have drawn their conclusions by the fact that they went for the guy's brother and not for the main man. Their so-called friend, who was part of the street gang fraternity, who hired them on to do this job, stepped in suddenly as best friend and protector of the property developer, saying, "No, I know who these people are. I can protect you from them, the scum that they are." And he knew too that the boys would have helped themselves to a few things around the apartment whenever they could. They did. I can't remember what, but anything that glittered and looked heavy. So they, he had even evidence, because he'd bought that cigar case or whatever it was, that he had things out. So suddenly Andreas is now not only unpaid, but hunted by the guy that is still claiming to be their friend. I mean, I think they could see through it, but it was getting. I was trying to learn really quickly. We're at the back of a set of flats that were kind of Soviet era, I guess. Not everybody was together, but we were talking about reading the street before, but I could read the emptiness downstairs. Suddenly, mothers had come and taken children away. Somebody decided to go off this way. There was unnatural quiet. And I'm starting to think, no, I'm supposed to remember the ways out of here. But there were no real heroics in this. I didn't feel confident to stay around. And I just thought I'm going to end up dead. I heard lots of heated discussions upstairs, and Andreas was still alive by phone later on that night. But apart from a little bit of preparatory work, it seemed best for me to get out of town on that one. I don't know. I still like to go back and see what it's like today, Russia, but it'd be completely different. This was, as I say, it was just a decade after the big changes had taken place. And they, you think of how conscious, it's just taken for granted that all, even fairly strong-willed and people who are determined to stay in power, they're very media conscious. Putin, I think he still has it every week, a TV show in which he feigns to take on, Joe Citizen's calls and seems to be interested in things.
Doesn't he like do
He speaks English,
wrestling or something as well? He's very macho. The way they portray him, it's very macho.
Oh, yeah, didn't they have him wrestling bears and something in the snow?
Wrestling bears.
Well, I mean, was this a gag or was it true? He's supposed to have been flying with geese across the world. Yeah, he. I think that has got to be a put on that one. They bonded him with the mother goose or something, and then with his eyes or something, and then
hypnotizing geese.
So that when they migrate, he was going to fly with them,
like men who stare at goats.
Yeah. Of course, Andreas. How long did he survive all of that? Until about longer than I thought. It was 2004 when, and I thought he was lucky to live that long. He made it to that, but at least my reporter on the scene, or second on the scene, somebody who he has tangled up with Ukrainian girlfriends. He was a bit of a conduit to that, because I told you, didn't I, that Robbie the Scot, who was another Pakistan inmate resident, accused unreasonably of a $6 billion oil pipeline fraud or something or other. You can imagine how that excited the guards in there. He'd ended up with Tatiana, the Russian girl, who had been used by her Nigerian student husband to smuggle a couple of kilos with a baby. It was a nightmare. Anyway, she stuck with Robbie, and and I got in touch with her anyway over because there's enough in the Russians' extended story. I thought to write a book about it, but I don't get time to finish my breakfast, so I don't know whether that's going to happen. If you're sensible, I'll get hit by a truck, and then you can. What you do is you take all of our recordings and knock them out as a McMillan tribute library.
Remember, it was his idea.
See, you got all the material. That's why I come down here every couple of months, because I figure, when something unexpectedly takes me away, at least I can bequeath you something. You'll have a kind of
12 episodes, at least 2.5 hours each.
What's that turn into in books?
Almost 30 hours. That's 3 books.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I mean, look, the audiobook world hasn't fully formed yet. They're going to be like little plays in the end, and there'll be like a kind of there'll be whisper synced Kindle editions and print books, but the real thing will be the sound and the voice behind it.
People will be clamoring for your voice in your absence. But scarcity value.
You can flesh up that 18 3 books worth, 30 hours into probably 50 with giving some research and background on my vagaries. And, so it's going to be the way of the world, isn't it?
We'll have to reach out.
We should be the first.
We'll have to reach out to the remaining characters that are still alive.
Yes, that's true. We've got to have a black book on that one to if you need to get them to talk for a while.
What was the fate of Andreas then?
Oh, a policeman got in touch with me the other day. From back in Operation Aries, the Australian thing back in the 1979-80.
Wow.
He wasn't very high up, but Kermit was his name. He was one
Kermit.
of the... Yeah. It's not... His real name's Derek, but he sent me some memorabilia from the little awards they got. I'm not sure why Kermit thought I'd be wanting that. I said, yeah, I'll have a copy made of the plaque you got and stick it in my office wall. But some mugshots from back then. I didn't look happy.
Oh, wow. You got anything James could use?
Yeah, probably, yeah. Because it was the traditional mugshot in those days with the number and front and profile.
We need to put your mugshot on a thumbnail.
Yeah, it'll be handy.
Yeah. So are we wrapping up now then until the next instalment?
Not quite. If I've got a few minutes, I need to say one thing, because Eloise is still dangling on a hook. Exactly. She is on the lookout for cobs, little country cottages. You know, those things that look like they're wearing a Beatles wig on top of their head, thatched roofs and all of that. She said she wanted to nestle there. Nestle. I don't think I'd be nestling there. I might be in a rocking chair, nestling back and forth with a shotgun in my lap and chewing tobacco instead of smoking, so I don't let the people who are coming to get us at night know that I'm here. And never chew tobacco, you get cancer of the mouth. They do in Sweden, snus, another bit of thing you pick up in your troubles. But keep this in mind before we move on to other subjects. I have I've got back to town. I've concluded the thing with Christianity. They actually paid me something, but it was never really settled up. I've taken care of that. It's a Saturday morning. Now, I know that Saturday morning, particularly because as I left on the Thursday night to go back into Scandinavia, pick up some money, and I was heading back to the airport. I was going to pick up my pager. You remember the pager? The pager is the thing that the auto dialer does.
Yeah.
And I realized it won't work outside of the UK. So Eloise is staying at my little bachelor pad at the time. And I remember it being on the shelf up the top there, but switched on and set to vibrate. And as I'm on my way to the airport, I've got a couple of hours to kill. So I'm going to call in at the lockers because I've got a few things I can't be bothered. I didn't want to have check-in luggage because that meant a different way through arriving back at Terminal 2. But had I known that I could alert Eloise to these things, or anybody, she would have seen on that shelf in my bachelor pad a little pager start to vibrate and move its way along, go to the end, and fall off the bookshelf into the waste paper bin, which is where my life is headed soon.
Oh, dear.
Oh, dear. Yes.
And the fate of Andreas.
Andreas, that was the thing. Robbie said, he was killed in the crossfire. I said, look, I'm sick of hearing about people being killed in crossfire. What the fuck is crossfire? You've got to be heading the wrong way. The only people killed in crossfire is like the wrong friendly fire soldiers or somebody who runs stupidly across the street during a shootout on both sides. It wasn't a crossfire at all. It was, he'd been grabbed by 3 people. They had him trussed up. He had a gun in his hand. And he wasn't going to go out without as many of them. So the real story, he had the neck of one of them in his mouth. The other one had just had his legs shot to pieces. And he had the other guy's gun wedged under his arm, but he pulled off a shot and it went through some important stuff that he never recovered from. So 3-1 it took to get him. But he went down, and
what a guy.
I didn't do too much apart from Tatiana said that there were people that were from his past and are supposed to be friends. Well, isn't that something you never heard before?